welcome Celia.
Thank you. Okay, so this is a talk, and Ness mentioned it's a rant. I'm really interested in time, the history of time. I'm interested in the difficult time problems that we're working on at work, where we've got scheduled queries on BigQuery and working out like UTC time and getting yesterday's data, and it's really interesting. And I'm also interested in time historically. Now, I went to a talk, and they were talking about time, and in my opinion, they got something wrong. And so this is not a question, more of a comment that I'm going to inflict on you guys. So I'm going to start off with the calendar, and I'm mainly focusing on the Romans because I used to be a Latin teacher, so I know the most about the Romans. There's heaps of interesting time stuff from all over the world and all periods of history. I'm also going to say I'm probably going to get stuff wrong-ish because there's a stretch of history that we don't actually know much about because not much was preserved. So some of it is kind of guesswork on the behalf of like clever historians, not me. So to start off with talking about the calendar, the Roman calendar, as we know it, started in 750-ish BCE, before Common Era, so before zero of what we talk about time now. And it was Romulus, the founder of Rome. He took on the Etruscan way of dealing with time. And they had an 8-day week. And it was around a market day, so the market day was on the 8th day, except the Romans called it the 9th day because they counted inclusively. So market number 1 was 1, and then you would count through, and then the next market was like the 9th day. So that was a 9-day week. And then you would start again on that market, and that would be number 1, and you would count through. So it's an 8-day week as we understand it, but they thought of it as a 9-day week because of how they counted the markets. They also had a 10-month year, and this was also inherited from the Etruscans, and it was around kind of agricultural practices, so people knew when to plant their crops, when to cut the vines for the wine. They still had like the 2 extra months there, like 61-ish days of winter, and they just didn't talk about it. And their year started in March. So they had these names for the months: Martius, Aprilis, Maius, Junius, Quintilius, Sextilius, Septem, Octo, Novem, Decem. I'm not actually 100% sure what those last 4 were actually called, so that's just the numbers for 7, 8, 9, and 10 in Latin. And what's my next slide? Oh, and then I've put the numbers next to them. So in Latin, Quintilius is 5, Sextilius is 6, Septem is 7, so on, 8, 9, 10. So if you've ever asked, like, why is December the 12th month, I'm about to explain. So this was Romulus. Then Numa was the second king of the early Roman Empire, early Rome. And he made some changes to the calendar. He added January and February, Januarius and Februarius, and he also added something called an intercalaris, which, because it was still based around agriculture, odd numbers were lucky, so the months were like 31 or 29 days long. And then they had extra days left over, so it was this intercalaris at the end, which they would like add days to or take days from to make the year line up with the solar year. Unfortunately, and probably not a huge surprise, oh wait, I'll go on to this first. Okay, the point I wanted to make was by the time we get to Numa, the months look very similar to how we know them today, apart from Quintilis and Sextilis in the middle there. And to come back to that intercalaris, weirdly, it got super political. So they had, in the Roman Republic, they had 2 consuls or a single dictator if they needed to go to war and they needed a unified leadership. And the pontiffs were responsible for calculating how long the intercalaris was. And if they liked the person in power, they'd be like, yeah, it's a bit longer this year. And if they didn't like them, they'd be like, oh, a bit shorter this year. And the political situation in the Roman Republic got more and more divided. Like there was greater division between the wealthy and the poor. People were very unhappy with the way it was. And then we have Julius Caesar. Now, Julius Caesar reformed the calendar and also took out this intercalaris bit to kind of make it less political and more like just a calendar. And if you've read Asterix, you'll know that Julius Caesar went to Egypt and may or may not have been involved with Cleopatra. And so he did a whole bunch of calculations, and he used the knowledge and the mathematics of the Egyptians and the Phoenicians to make a new Roman calendar. Another thing that happened was he changed the name of Quintilius to July. He changed it, or the people changed it to honour him. That was the month of his birth. He was at the end of the Roman Republic. He had brought together two other people, Pompey and Crassus, to take power. And the Republic started because the final king before the Republic was very bad. And the Romans were very suspicious about kings. And I don't know how many people know what happened to Julius Caesar in the end, but there's some bad things coming. So he had to be kind of careful and not be like, I'm a king, because the Romans didn't like kings, but he was like, oh yeah, I'm just naming this month after me, or you are honouring me by naming this month after me. And he kind of said, oh yeah, I'm actually descended from gods, so maybe keep me as ruler. Unfortunately, he then did demand that they make him dictator for life rather than for 1 year, which was what was supposed to happen. And if you don't already know, he was stabbed to death by the senators on the Ides of March in 44 BCE, so a year after this calendar change. His son came to power after that, Augustus, his adopted son. And Augustus was much cleverer than, this is my opinion, much cleverer than Julius Caesar about becoming a supreme leader, because he was very careful not to in any way suggest that he was a supreme leader. And he just kind of did stuff, and then he developed the, oh yeah, I'm descended from a god story, and also changed, or the people honoured him by changing one of the months. There's also something that is probably a myth, that at this stage, July was 31 days and August was 29 or 30 days, and he wanted to have the same number of days as Julius Caesar, so he took some days out of the end of the year in February and put them into August so that his month was as long as Julius Caesar's month. But that's probably a myth. It's a good story though. There were a bunch of emperors afterwards who also tried to rename the months, but they didn't stick. So Caligula renamed September Germanicus, Nero renamed April Neronis, and May as Claudius. Domitian renamed September as Germanicus as well, and the 8th month as Domitianus, after himself. There's a lot of different names that they call the months, but none of them stuck, and we've ended up with this situation that we've got now, except it's in the wrong order. So there was some calendar stuff. This was 8 CE, so 8 years after the year 0. And then in 1582, Pope Gregory reformed the calendar again. So previously we were on the Julian calendar, and then Pope Gregory reformed the calendar to become the Gregorian calendar. So the 7-day week wasn't strictly, Pope Gregory. As the Roman Empire expanded, they discovered that some people were counting their weeks as 7 days. They were still counting their week as 8 days. And so it kind of, it moved in and out, and somehow 7 days a week won, and I don't know how or why. So if anyone knows, I would love to know. And when the year started to start in January is also under debate, but I'm going to say that Gregory changed it so that the year started in January. So this was in 1582. But it didn't change in England until 1752, and that's largely because Pope Gregory was Catholic and most of England wasn't Catholic, and they were a bit sus. They thought it was some kind of religious attempt to get rid of Protestantism or whatever religion was going on in England at the time. And also, Turkey was kind of the last one on board in 1926-ish. I think it's ish because when they changed, it went from 1926 to 1927. So there we have the months again. Not quite sure why, but like this is what we expect. Oh yeah, I put January at the start. And this is why December is the 12th month, but it's got 10 in its name. Okay, the pizza's here, so I'm going to quickly do the hours of the day in Roman times. So we're going back to Rome. And this blew my mind when I learned it. So they had the same thing as us, that a day starts at midnight. So if you're talking about the Ides of March, the Ides of March starts at midnight on the 15th of March. But when they divided it up into hours, they had 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of nighttime. So whenever the sun rose, they would divide that time till sunset into 12, and that would be an hour. And then the same, when the sun set, they would divide the dark time into 12, and those would be hours. So in summer, the hours during the day would be really long, and in winter, the hours during the day would be really short because they were always a 12th of how much daylight there was. Blew my mind. And it took me a little while to understand what my lecturer was talking about, and I didn't believe them for a little while, but that's on me. I've got this slide in here. I'm not sure why. Plutarch was a Greek who became a Roman citizen, and he wrote all this stuff like, Romans are weird, and compared a whole bunch of practices between Greece and Rome that he thought were weird, including like, why do they start the day at midnight? Because a bunch of places the day started at sunset or the day started at sunrise. So this was, starting at midnight was a bit weird as far as Plutarch was concerned. The next slides, I'm just going to skip through. Henry Booth, he did the railways in England. Manchester to Liverpool. Manchester, no, another one starting with M. Liverpool was definitely involved. Why didn't I write speaker notes? I'm going to say Manchester to Liverpool. I'm as bad as the talk that I got angry about. So he standardised time in England so that all the railways would line up with each other. It took a little while to adopt in England, but not as long as like the new calendar. And then it kind of travelled to the US, and they took on this standardisation. And finally, France kind of came on board in 1891 as well. Two excellent talks, one that I've seen, one that I've been told about. Zach Coleman spoke at RubyConf in 2018 in Australia, and he did a great talk on time. UTC is enough for everyone, right? And I've also been told about a talk by Daniel Phone at Kiwi RubyConf called A Brief History of Time.new, which I'm going to watch after this. I was told to watch it after I'd spoken. And finally, this is my cat Ripley. And that's all. Thank you very much.
How do you stop it? Do you want to take questions?
Oh, does anyone have questions? Okay.
If the evening was calculated as just divided by 12, how did they actually pick when midnight was for the day to start? I'm not sure if you
the opposite of noon. So noon is really easy to pick because it's like the smallest shadow on a sundial. Like you stick a stick in the ground, there's no shadow, it's noon. So whatever the opposite of noon is midnight.
I don't suppose you know why 12.
I do, because, well, this is a theory, I think, more than the actual answer, but like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So it was a really popular way of counting, so they think that that ease of counting is why 12 is such a popular number. And there's a whole bunch of cool stuff about 60 as well.
12 and 60 are highly divisible, so they worked a lot in trade because people who didn't have formal mathematics educations or calculators could easily do a lot of trading in marketplaces using those systems.
Yeah. Oh, good.
Thank you very much, Celia.
My pleasure. I don't know how to